Speech off.
Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. So I'm here to do a sort of review slash kind of analysis of Anne of Green Gables. Just my thoughts on it. I'm participating in Chantel Reads All Days Year of Maud, I guess, challenge. She's doing a different Lucy Maud Montgomery book every month. The majority of them are Anne books. They're already on Anne of Avonlea, but honestly, I kind of wanted to do a video like this, so I was taking my time reading the books and taking notes. Let's see how long this video is. My last take was almost an hour long, so we're going to try to shorten it. So I'm not going to necessarily go over every chapter, just the way I did with the other one. Anyway, so let's just get started. So we start off the book with Rachel Lynde wondering what Matthew's up to. He's wearing a suit, and he's going out in public, which is not a thing. So she finds out from Marilla that they're going to adopt a boy, and she, tells her all the terrible things that orphan boys have done, including murder. Very nice, Rachel Lynde. We immediately know she's a gossip. The next chapter is Matthew meeting Anne. We find out that Matthew is very shy and terrified of girls, and yet he falls in love with Anne pretty much on sight. I mean, wow. He's the best character in this entire book, in my humble opinion. So, he finds out there was a mistake. He meets Anne. He has to take her home. What else is he going to do? And I must admit that her chatter on the way home is a bit much. I love Anne, but that first chapter where she's talking even wears on my nerves. So then we get home, and Anne sees Green Gables for the first time, meets Marilla. And actually, I have to say that I first saw Anne of Green Gables. I didn't read the book first. I saw the Megan Follows version, and I didn't like Marilla at all in that version at the beginning. It took a very long time. She was more prickly and kind of mean, I think. I don't know. Maybe it was the actress's voice. I don't know. But I always thought she was nicer in the books. A little snarky, sure, but not mean. I don't know. But I really loved her pretty much from day one in the books. Anyway. So, yeah. She takes Anne to Mrs. Spencer to find out the mistake. And Mrs. Spencer is about to give her to a lady named Mrs. Blewett, but Marilla stops her. And the second she sees Mrs. Blewett, she's like, you know what, I'm going to keep her. I kind of love that she pretty much made up her mind from that moment on that she was going to keep her. Oh yeah, and it also helps that she heard Anne's history. I also would like to recommend Before Green Gables, a prequel by Budge Wilson. I think this author really does show Anne's early life well, and honestly, if I didn't know better, I would say it was a Montgomery book too. The author really does Anne's voice well. Anyway, so yeah, there's that. Anne tells Marilla about her very sad life, and Marilla decides to take her back home. That night, she teaches Anne to say her prayers. Pretty disastrous prayer, I must say. But I like that Marilla, as shocked as she is, she realizes why the prayer is so odd. I mean, it's literally Anne talking to a stranger. She doesn't really know. She knows God exists, but she doesn't have like a relationship with God. So, yeah. Then the next big moment is Rachel Lynde meets Anne, and Anne insults her. Honestly, rightfully so. I know I'm supposed to be siding with the adults as an adult person, but Mrs. Lynde had it coming. And even Marilla thought she had it coming. And I appreciated that she took up for Anne. I'm drinking hot chocolate. Anyway, she took up for Anne, but she told Anne that she wouldn't be able to come out of her room until she apologized. So, yeah. Took a few days, because Anne wouldn't apologize until Matthew coerced her into it. Although I have to say, Matthew he really puts being a child into perspective. Because he pretty much tells her, like, just say it to smooth things over, like, whether you're sorry or not. And that's really kind of the golden ticket in childhood. All you really have to do is say sorry meekly, whether you feel it or not, and you're kind of done with whatever transgression you made. The more you stall that sorry, the longer the punishment is. It's kind of the key to childhood. To at least getting out of trouble in childhood. Don't let your kid listen to this, but yeah, that's kind of what, I don't know. I sort of always loved that aspect of the book. I don't know if that's what it's supposed to teach me, but I always felt like Lucy Maud Montgomery understood kids and understood, like, kind of the mechanics of being a kid and how you function in the world as a child. You have to learn to fake it till you make it sometimes as a kid to get along with dumb adults. Don't let your children listen to my then next important thing is Anne's impressions of Sunday school. This is where I wrote my first real kind of note that's worth mentioning. Anne goes to Sunday school for the first time, wears flowers in her hair, and Mrs. Lynde is upset about it and tells Marilla. Marilla couldn't go because she had one of her headaches. Oh, yeah. Interestingly enough, speaking of Marilla's headaches, we hear about her headaches and Matthew's heart from the beginning. The reason that they were getting an orphan in the first place was Matthew's heart. So you'd think that we would see Matthew's death coming from, like, day one. Because from the beginning, the very first chapter, we're hearing about Matthew's bad heart. So it's kind of funny that we don't see it coming. Anyway, but the note I wrote for this particular chapter was that Marilla asks Anne how Sunday school is and then gets mad at Anne because she says she doesn't like it. And I've always thought that this is, like, something that bugs me about adults. If you don't want to know the answer to a question, don't ask the question. Otherwise, you ask the question, so you can't get mad when we give an opinion that you don't like, because you wanted to know. I guess I don't like adults expecting a certain answer from a kid and then getting mad when they don't get it. Like kids are some robots without a mind of their own, who are just supposed to parrot back these rote answers that adults think they should have to be good little children. Anyway, next chapter, enter Diana, solemn vow and promise. Marilla takes Anne to meet Diana. And this is the first chapter where Marilla admits that she's glad they kept Anne to Matthew. She says it at the end of the chapter. I also love the end of this particular chapter once they get home from meeting Diana. Matthew's there with a thing of chocolates for Anne. And, I don't know. It's just so sweet. For some reason, I love that he gets her chocolates more than I like when he gets her the dress. It's just such a dad moment. Like, he comes home with candy, and Marilla says that it'll spoil her dinner, and then Anne says she's going to share it with her friend. It's such a cozy little scene. I don't know why. Every time I read the book, I love that ending, like, a lot. Then, we hear about the school. Okay, here's another thing. The Delights of Anticipation is the title of this next chapter, and Anne is telling Marilla about a book she borrowed from Diana, and the book was about a woman with 5 lovers. Clearly Marilla isn't paying one bit of attention to whatever Anne's saying, because there's at least 2 or 3 times when Anne says, like, completely scandalous things, and it goes completely over Marilla's head. But this is the first one. 5 lovers? Like, pious religious Marilla if she was actually paying attention to Anne, would be like taking that book away. And it's wild because she doesn't talk about that stuff with anyone else besides Marilla. And Marilla is like probably tuning her out. Anyway, Anne is also talking about the Sunday school picnic. That's the anticipation of the title of this chapter. And I love that we hear about her love of ice cream. Or, like, that she wants to try ice cream for the first time. Ice cream seems like such a normal thing that we eat, but it's, like, such a novelty for her. I don't know. And then we have the whole incident with the brooch. Anne picks it up and says she puts it back, but Marilla can't find it, so she doesn't believe her. And Marilla tells Anne that she's not going to the picnic until she confesses what actually happened to the brooch. And so Anne makes up this wild confession about what happened to it. And whenever I read this, I always think, seriously, Anne? You honestly think Marilla's going to let you go to the picnic after you drowned her brooch? Or, you know, because that's what you said you did to it. Anne is so literal in this scene, which is funny because she's so smart and, like, book smart. So you would think she would realize that, like, that confession, even if it's a good story, might make Marilla mad enough not to let her go. But in Anne's mind, I confess so I can go. Crazy kid. Anyway, Marilla finds it and she lets her go. Next is one of the highlights of this entire book. A tempest in the school teapot. Anne starts school for the first time. And I wrote in my notes, enter Gilbert Blythe, my nemesis. And I was thinking as I was reading this book that I think he is what started my hatred for enemies to lovers. Because I loved that Anne held such a grudge toward him. Like, I was all about the grudge. And then she kind of disappointed me by forgiving him at the end. And I never really liked Gilbert that much. I went from despising him in the first book to, by the time she gets, like, really when she gets with him, he's a nothing. Like, from the time that they get married on, he's like, I don't understand the love for Gilbert except the trope of it all. Like, I don't see why he's so beloved. He has no personality whatsoever. He's just there. Like, I could read the same book without him or his storyline in it and enjoy it just as much. Really, the only thing that would change is that Anne might have been a terrible student if it wasn't for her rivalry with him, which somebody in Chantel's Live pointed out. And they're not wrong. I think Anne is so, like, flighty and just a flake that she probably wouldn't have done so well in school without Gilbert being there to compete against. But, yeah, I don't know. I think he was definitely probably what started my hatred for that romance trope. Enemies to lovers, because that's pretty much what it was with them. And I was just like, Gilbert deserves never to be forgiven for calling her carrots. And to this day, like, I think I really get into the grudge of it all, even as an adult. Like, I know in my adult brain that it's right that she forgave him, but because I'm reading the book from her perspective, I'm all into the grudge, even now, so I don't want her to forgive him. Anyway, you know, he calls her carrots and she breaks a slate on his head. The loveliest moment. I have the quote here. Let me find it. Okay. You mean, hateful boy. How dare you? Thwack. That's pretty much all that's written there. And then on my note I wrote, how satisfying. And then Mr. Phillips makes her write lines about not losing her temper, and he spells her name wrong, which he's upset about. Mr. Phillips sucks in general, though. First of all, his thing with Prissy Andrews is real inappropriate. I mean, it's not when you think about their ages, because, like, I mean, in the next book, Anne is teaching school at 16. But, like, it's so weird the power dynamic of it. Because, like, I know that Prissy is probably 15, 16, and he would be, like, maybe 18, 19, so I guess the age is fine. It's just, like, maybe don't fall for people you're teaching, even if you are close to the same age, because that's just, it feels like harassment, or just so inappropriate. Anyway, then Mr. Phillips singles Anne out for being late among everyone, even though everybody else was late, and he makes her sit with Gilbert Blythe. And Gilbert tries to give her a candy heart, and she smashes it. Go, Anne. Now here's a question. Do you think it's kind of unlike Marilla to let Anne stay home from school? I know she got the advice from Mrs. Lynde, but still, I think it's a little weird that she would just go with it. And then the end of the chapter is Anne crying over the idea of Diana getting married. And Marilla is like, because she would hate her husband. And Marilla, like, is cackling at Anne, sobbing about hating Diana's future husband. I don't think we really even know how Anne feels about the guy she ends up marrying. Because really, once Diana gets married, it's kind of game over for them. Like, they're not really close because Anne moves away. Then we have the infamous tea party where Diana accidentally gets drunk because Anne gives her something that is not raspberry cordial. And Diana drinks a lot of it, and Mrs. Barry is pissed. I wish we could have seen Marilla yelling at Mrs. Barry, like, in the book. We just hear about it. It would have been nice to see it, though. I think we see it in the movie, though, right? Anyway, I also put in my notes that this is the first time when Marilla gives Anne a goodnight kiss. She finds that she cried herself to sleep, and she gives her a kiss. And it's sweet. Next is... The next chapter is called A New Interest in Life, and Anne and Diana say a very dramatic goodbye. Anne is also surprised to learn that Diana loves her because no one has ever loved her before. And it's interesting because, we find out later that Anne does not realize that Marilla and Matthew love her. Even, like, years later, she thinks they took her in out of a sense of duty. We hear about it in a later chapter. Like, she honestly does not think that they love her as much as they do. At least Marilla. Anyway. Here's a quote from the chapter, because it's funny. Diana gave me a lock of her hair, and I'm going to sew it up in a little bag and wear it around my neck all my life. Please see that it is buried with me, for I don't believe I'll live very long. Perhaps when she sees me lying cold and dead before her, Mrs. Barry may feel remorse for what she has done, and will let Diana come to my funeral. I don't think there's much fear of your dying of grief as long as you can talk, Anne, said Marilla unsympathetically. God, that is one of the funniest quotes. I had to write it down. I wrote a bunch of quotes as we go through the book. We're getting to some of them. Also, it's interesting that Anne is bad at geometry. I always think about it because whenever I reread The Diary of Anne Frank is also bad at geometry. So both Annes have something in common. Then we have Anne going to help Minnie May with the croup. Diana comes to get her, and Matthew goes to the doctor, and, that is what makes Mrs. Barry reconsider them being friends. Oh, two things. One, this chapter skips to January. I wish we would have seen Anne's first Christmas with the Cuthberts. That would have been nice, right? We really don't get many Christmases. We get the Christmas with the puff sleeves, which is a very brief scene, and then we get a Christmas in Anne of Ingleside. I would have loved more Christmases. What else? Oh yeah. I was wondering about Anne and Diana being friends. This is just a sign of the times, because I think if this had happened in, like, our modern time, Anne and Diana would have probably just been friends at school and not told Mrs. Barry and not come to each other's houses. Or are we just disobedient in this day and age? Because I probably would have done that. I wouldn't have, like, looked at Diana longingly from across the room. I would have been talking to her and, well, Mom, you can't control what happens at school unless you want to change schools. We're just bad, disobedient children of today. Or is it just because it was a small town and they couldn't even try it? Like, it's interesting that Anne, who has, like, well, no bringing up, as Marilla likes to say, doesn't even occur to her that they could just be friends away from Mrs. Barry. I don't know. Anyway, whatever the case, Mrs. Barry forgives her after she sees Minnie May, and yeah. She gets invited to a concert in the next chapter. It's called A Concert, a Catastrophe, and a Confession. And I wrote, what's so great about sleeping in a spare room bed? I'm with Marilla. I avoid going anywhere that means I can't sleep in my own bed. Also, Matthew is very effective at the guilt trip. He states his opinion and then kind of just waits it out quietly until Marilla caves. He doesn't have to say anything at all. He just sits there silently judging. Anyway, the girls get back from the concert and they race to the spare room bed and they almost kill Mrs. Barry, Josephine Barry, Diana's great aunt, I think. I remember this scene so vividly from the movie because the actress made a noise like she got the wind knocked out of her. It was a great moment for TV for her. And she's, I don't know, I loved her from then on. I love the relationship she develops with Anne. I think she likes her more than Diana by that point. Like, she invites her and Diana over later for an exhibition, and then she lets Anne basically stays with her or visits her on weekends when she's in Queens. It's just nice. And then I also pointed out that Mrs. Lynde's reaction to Anne's misfortune is funny. She kind of laughs it off. She's like, I knew it was you. It was your idea to jump in a person's bed. But what's also funny is how you can see the relationship has improved so much because Anne actually asks her for advice. And Mrs. Lynde is actually really sweet about it. She gives her very sound advice, which is, think before you leap, especially into spare room beds. Good line, Mrs. Lynde. Good line. And, yeah. I wrote, I love Mrs. Barry. She's a curmudgeonly good egg. Then we have the haunted wood, where Anne imagines a haunted wood, and Marilla is, like, in no mood for it and makes her walk through the haunted wood. I wonder if Marilla would have been a little bit more sympathetic if she hadn't had another headache. She was probably like, I don't have time for this. I'm barely recovering from a migraine. Marge kid. But it was funny. So nothing caught you? I don't know. And like, she was just so unsympathetic. It was funny. Next chapter is A New Departure in Flavoring. I love the title of that one. First we have Mr. Phillips. It's the end of the school year. Mr. Phillips leaves, and Anne cries. Wasn't it fortunate, Marilla, that I took an extra handkerchief to school today? I had a presentiment that it would be needed. I never thought you were so fond of Mr. Phillips that you'd require 2 handkerchiefs to dry your tears because he was going away, said Marilla. That's wild. Anyway, Mr. and Mrs. Allen arrive, the new minister and his wife, and they have them for tea or dinner. I don't know. But I noticed the food. What is with the food? And I need to know how this works. This is what they have for food for that dinner. Jelly chicken and cold tongue, 2 kinds of jelly, red and yellow, and whipped cream and lemon pie and cherry pie and 3 kinds of cookies and fruitcake, and Marilla's famous yellow plum preserves, and pound cake, and layer cake, and biscuits, and new bread, and old bread. So let me get this straight. You're having 2 different kinds of meats. One of them is already jellied. And then, like, a bunch of jelly, preserves, and bread. Biscuits, cookies, bread, cake, and cake. I'm very confused by this entire meal. No potatoes, no nothing. It's like they're having chicken tongue and bread as the savory part, and then the rest is dessert. And I'm assuming biscuits are actual, like, biscuits, and not, because she says cookies in this description, so they're not talking about British, like, you know, how they call cookies biscuits. So they're having a lot of carbs there. Like, what happened to no mashed potatoes, no side dishes, no, just chicken, jellied chicken. So why do we need 3 kinds of jelly? And what are preserves? What's the difference between jelly and preserves? I've never understood this food. Anyway, I love Mrs. Allen. She is very kind to Anne and the liniment cake. And then here's a quote. Marilla, isn't it nice to think that tomorrow is a new day with no mistakes in it yet? It's a great chapter. Next big event is Anne come the ridgepole thing. But, okay, I need to read this beginning part. Almost a month having elapsed since the liniment cake episode, it was high time for her to get into fresh trouble of some sort. Little mistakes such as absent-mindedly emptying a pan of skim milk into a basket of yarn balls in the pantry instead of into the pig's bucket, and walking clean over the edge of the log bridge into the brook while wrapped in imaginative reverie, not really being worth counting. These incidents aren't worth mentioning. Maybe the yarn balls aren't a thing, but the brook? You're telling me that we bypassed a scene where Anne just walking down the bridge and splash, she just falls into the water? That doesn't even make it into the movies. That's hilarious. And Marilla's reaction would have been amazing. But we're just gonna bypass this? Alrighty then. Fine. Anyway, so there's a party, Diana's house, and they're daring each other, and Josie Pye, the monster, dares Anne to walk across the roof of the ridgepole. And I'm gonna read some quotes. This has some real quotable quotes. I mean, wild. First, I must do it. My honor is at stake, said Anne solemnly. I shall walk that ridgepole, Diana, or perish in the attempt. If I am killed, you are to have my pearl bead ring. So yeah, then she falls. And then it says, if Anne had tumbled off the roof on the side up which she ascended, Diana would probably have fallen heir to the pearl bead ring. Then and there. And then once the girls get to her, this is wild. Anne, are you killed? Shrieked Diana, throwing herself on her knees beside her friend. Oh, Anne, dear Anne, speak just one word to me and tell me if you're killed. Alrighty, Diana. If she's killed, she wouldn't be speaking a word to you. That's how you'd know she was killed. And then, I think I've been rendered unconscious, said Anne. Oh, where? Shrieked, I don't know who, I just put that as a note. I guess I didn't quote it fully. But these people do not know what unconscious means, clearly. And then, the best quote of the chapter, when they get to Marilla, to the Cuthbert place. At that moment, Marilla had a revelation. In the sudden stab of fear that pierced to her very heart, she realized what Anne had come to mean to her. She would have admitted that she liked Anne, nay, that she was very fond of Anne. But now she knew, as she hurried wildly down the slope, that Anne was dearer to her than anything on earth. So yeah, there's that. And I was thinking, as I finish this chapter, that we kind of speed by Anne's, like, recovery from a broken ankle. I would have loved to see more of that. I mean, I want details. What is Marilla like tending to you when you're sick? Did she have to, like, carry her around with that broken ankle? And did she hold her hand when they were setting the ankle? I don't know. Like, I wanted more details on that. Like, what is she like when you're on your sick bed? I feel like we just kind of skimmed past it. And I wanted more details on Marilla being sweet when Anne is injured. Anyway, then we enter Miss Stacy, and she's has them do like a Christmas concert. I wrote, this is what caught my attention in this chapter. Josie Pye is sulky because she didn't get the part she wanted in the dialogue. She wanted to be the fairy queen. That would have been ridiculous, for who ever heard of a fairy queen as fat as Josie? Ooh, that line truly did not age well. Really. Bad line. Anyway, then we have the puff sleeves. Matthew is struggling with shopkeepers to get Anne the dress with puff sleeves. And, you know, it's a nice scene, but weirdly enough, I like the scene with the chocolates more in an earlier chapter. But yeah, it was nice when Anne cried and he's all panicked, like, don't you like it? Oh no. Anyway. So yeah, Anne does her concert, and yeah. Matthew tells Marilla that he told Anne that he was proud of her, and Marilla said that she was proud of her too, but she would never tell her. And they start talking about, Matthew is actually one who brings up Anne's potentially being educated, getting higher education, which was an interesting take. I never noticed. The next thing that happens is that the story club is formed. And here's the next sentiment where Anne is talking to Marilla. Ruby Gillis is rather sentimental. She puts too much lovemaking into her stories. And you know too much is worse than too little. What is it with Anne constantly talking about sex to Marilla, and Marilla just not noticing? This is like the second time she's mentioned like something potentially bad to Marilla, and Marilla's like, whatever. Anyway, and then we hear about Diana putting too many murders into her stories because she doesn't know what to do with her characters, so she just kills them. Next big event is Anne dyeing her hair green. I mean, that was hilarious. Then we have the Lily Maid incident where Anne is floating down the brook or the lake of shining waters, I don't know, and Gilbert comes to her rescue. And I have to say, I'm not a Gilbert fan. I said this earlier. But, Anne, maybe you might want to, like, be a little nicer to him. At least until he gets you onto dry land. Because, frankly, if you were that mean to me, I'd probably leave you there. Hanging on the piles, waiting for some other person to come save you. Because you're mean. Anyway, again, I'm not exactly forgive Gilbert for everything, but you gotta be nice to him as he's rowing you to shore. So yeah, there's that. Anne doesn't forgive him when he asks her to, and yeah. Then Anne and Diana get invited to the exhibition with Aunt Josephine. Nothing really happens there. Anne just kind of tells them about it. Marilla says she's lonely. She got lonely without Anne for 4 days. Okay, the next chapter is the Queen's classes organized. Okay, here's where you find out that Anne had no idea that Marilla loved her. Certainly Anne herself had no idea how Marilla loved her. She sometimes thought wistfully that Marilla was very hard to please and distinctly lacking in sympathy and understanding, but she also checked the thought reproachfully, remembering what she owed to Marilla. So yeah, Anne never really... It took her forever to realize that Marilla loved her. And she's like 13 and a half. She'd been with them for like 2.5 years at this point. Anyway, Marilla's trying to tell her about the Queen's class. And Anne keeps... Basically, all Marilla has to say is, Miss Stacy came to talk to me about you. And Anne is instantly, like, terrified that Miss Stacy came to tell her that Anne had been reading a book when she was supposed to be doing history or some assignment. And it made me laugh because I used to do the same thing. I used to put my hands inside, like, you know, the place in the desk where you put books. And because it was a Braille book, I could just read it, like, with my fingers. The teacher would be talking and I'd be turning the pages with my hands under my desk and the little shelf, reading the book. Anyway, I related to Anne in that moment. We also find out, though, that Marilla might be lax in censoring Anne's literature for lovers and sex, but Miss Stacy and Mrs. Allen are on the job. No more books about 3 lovers for you, Anne. Diana isn't allowed to join the Queen's class, and it's kind of interesting because it doesn't seem like the Barrys are all for higher education for their girls, but Marilla and Matthew are. So, yeah. Next chapter, it's not really significant, but it's called Where the Broken River Meet. But I thought it was interesting because Anne and Marilla have kind of an adult conversation. They have a bonding moment over Mrs. Lynde. Anne asks her if she's, like, terrible because whenever Mrs. Lynde tells her to do something, she wants to do the opposite. And Marilla kind of confides in her that she feels the same way. I think it was, like, the first adult conversation that they've had, like, you know, where Marilla's not, like, trying to teach or anything. She's just like, you know what? I feel the same way. Like, you know, she admits she has flaws and feelings instead of trying to, like, make Anne a better person. It was just interesting. And then at the end of that chapter, Marilla cries because Anne is getting bigger. She loved the girl as much as she loved the she loved the girl as much as she loved the child. Next big event is the pass lists are out. Anne is at the top with Gilbert. They're tied. Next thing is they go to a hotel concert. Matthew gives Anne a pearl necklace. And she gets stage fright and only goes through with her dialogue because she thinks Gilbert Blythe is grinning smugly at her. And she can't show him up. Next we have A Queen's Girl. This is where all my quotes come in, like a long passage. But I cannot pass this up. It's like my favorite passage of the entire book. So I'm going to read the whole thing. But basically Marilla makes her a dress, like a fancy dress, to take to Queen's. And Anne is like reciting something for them in it. And Marilla starts to cry. That's the context. I just couldn't help thinking of the little girl you used to be, Anne, and I was wishing you could have stayed a little girl, even with all your queer ways. You've grown up now, and you're going away, and you look so tall and stylish and so different altogether in that dress, as if you didn't belong in Avonlea at all. And I just got lonesome thinking it all over. Marilla! Anne sat down on Marilla's gingham lap, took Marilla's lined face between her hands, and looked gravely and tenderly into Marilla's eyes. I'm not a bit changed, not really. I'm only just pruned down and branched out. The real me, back here, is just the same. It won't make a bit of difference where I go or how much I change outwardly. At heart, I shall always be your little Anne, who will love you and Matthew and dear Green Gables more and better every day of her life. Anne laid her fresh young cheek against Marilla's faded one and reached out a hand to pat Matthew's shoulder. Marilla would have given much then to have possessed Anne's power of putting her feelings into words. but nature and habit had willed it otherwise, and she could only put her arms close about her girl and hold her tenderly to her heart, wishing that she need not let her go. Matthew, with a suspicious moisture in his eyes, got up and went out of doors. Under the stars of the blue summer night, he walked agitatedly across the yard to the gate under the poplars. "Well now, I guess she ain't been much spoiled," he muttered proudly. "I guess my putting in my oar occasional never did much harm after all. She's smart and pretty and loving too, which is better than all the rest. She's been a blessing to us, and there never was a luckier mistake than what Mrs. Spencer made, if it was luck. I don't believe it was any such thing. It was Providence, because the Almighty saw we needed her, I reckon." So, yeah, that is like my favorite passage, and I just had to read the whole thing. So, yeah, Anne leaves, and that night after Anne leaves, Marilla cries with a passion that made her ashamed of herself later, which means it's probably a very loud cry. And let's end off on a funny quote for this chapter. Anne is homesick and is happy to see Josie Pye. As a part of Abilene life, even a pie was welcome. Next chapter was the winter at Queen's. Honestly, nothing really interesting happens at Queen's. It kind of just shows time passing. The only interesting thing is that Anne is noticing that Gilbert isn't the worst. She says he has a nice chin, and she enjoys the rivalry between them. Anne wins the Avery Scholarship. Matthew and Marilla were there at the commencement ceremony. I quoted that too. Matthew and Marilla were there with eyes and ears for only one student on the platform, a tall girl in pale green with faintly flushed cheeks and starry eyes, who read the best essay and was pointed out and whispered about as the Avery winner. "Reckon you're glad we kept her, Marilla," whispered Matthew, speaking for the first time since he had entered the hall, when Anne had finished her essay. "It's not the first time I've been glad," retorted Marilla. "You do like to rub things in, Matthew Cuthbert." So, yeah, that was a nice line. Then Anne gets home and notices that Matthew's unwell. And let's finish it off with a tearjerker for this chapter. "If I had been the boy you sent for," said Anne wistfully, "I'd be able to help you so much now and spare you in 100 ways. I could find it in my heart to wish I had been, just for that." "Well now, I'd rather have you than a dozen boys, Anne," said Matthew, patting her hand. "Just mind you that, rather than a dozen boys. Well now, I guess it wasn't a boy that took the Avery Scholarship, was it?" "It was a girl. My girl that I'm proud of." It was the last night before sorrow touched her life, and no life is ever quite the same again when once that cold, sanctifying touch has been laid upon it. And that is how we end that chapter. And the next chapter is the one we all dread, the Reaper whose name is Death. When Matthew, it starts with Matthew instantly, dying. He collapses. And, yeah. I remember reading it for the first time and not expecting it happening exactly like that, because in the movie, that scene that I just read happened when he was dying. Anne was, holding him, and he was dying as he was telling her that he was proud of her. I'm glad that it happened this way in the book, because it's less, I don't know, I feel like I prefer it happen when he was standing up and not, at death's door in the moment. Anyway, next quote is after everyone goes to bed, Anne wakes up crying and Marilla comes in to comfort her. So I'm just going to read this passage. "I couldn't have Diana stay. She's good and kind and sweet, but it's not her sorrow. She's outside of it, and she couldn't come close enough to my heart to help me. It's our sorrow, yours and mine. Oh, Marilla, what will we do without him? We've got each other, Anne. I don't know what I'd do if you weren't here, if you'd never come. Oh, Anne, I know I've been kind of strict and harsh with you, maybe, but you mustn't think I didn't love you as well as Matthew did for all that. I want to tell you now, when I can. It's never been easy for me to say things out of my heart, but at times like this, it's easier. I love you as dear as if you were my own flesh and blood, and you've been my joy and comfort ever since you came to Green Gables. I think that's one of my last quotes, but it's definitely up there in a favorite. And you really do, as you get into the next book, Anne and Marilla really become friends from then on. And she's just so much nicer. So in some ways, Matthew had to die in order for them to form an even stronger bond in the next book. I wish he hadn't, because he's my favorite character, but I can't see them being as close as they are in the next book, or as much friends if he were still there. Because it's like, once he died, Marilla was able to tell her that she loved her, and there was no more wall between them. Anyway, my last note for this chapter is, how old is Gilbert's dad if Marilla was dating him? Because she talks to Anne about, like, having a kind of romance with him. And I'm just like, how old was this guy? Whatever. Last chapter is a bend in the road. Anne decides to give up the scholarship and teach so that she could stay with Marilla because her eyesight is failing. Marilla Cuthbert, I'd appreciate it if you did not compare being blind to being dead. Thank you very much. I'm insulted by that comparison. So, yeah, there's that. Okay, a couple more quotes. Then we have Rachel Lynde coming over after she finds out about Anne giving up the scholarship. This is wild. I've been on my feet all day, and 200 pounds is a good bit for 2 feet to carry around. It's a great blessing not to be fat, Marilla. I hope you appreciate it. Alrighty, Mrs. Lynde. I didn't know that you weighed 200 pounds. I never paid attention to that. But apparently she weighs 200 pounds. Huh. And then the last part is Anne forgives Gilbert Blythe finally when he gives up the Avonlea school for her so she could stay with Marilla full time. And this final quote, I need you guys to put a pin in this quote because I'm going to bring it back in a future book to support an argument. We are going to be the best of friends, said Gilbert jubilantly. We were born to be good friends, Anne. You thwarted destiny long enough. I know that we can help each other in many ways. So, yeah, it ends with them being friends. Put a pin in it because we'll be back in March, hopefully, when we read Anne of the Island, and I put in my big argument. And on that note, we have finished my recap of Anne of Green Gables. Hopefully this is shorter than my last attempt. I tried my best. So yeah, I'm gonna tag people that I know like Anne of Green Gables, but if you can think of others, I'd love it if you would share it. The video, that is. Please like, comment, and subscribe. I'm at 182 subscribers. I'm really hoping to get to 200 in the next few weeks. It's exciting. So yeah, I'd appreciate that. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And I will talk to you guys in my next video. Bye.
Speech on. Stop recording video.